Good evening, Browns fans, and welcome to OBR Weekly. It's Wednesday at 7 o'clock, and I'm Barry. He's Fred. He's a legend. And we're here to talk Cleveland Browns football as things just keep on happening to our dear old orange and brown. How's it going, Fred?
Pretty cold. Kind of cold out.
It is cold. It's cold. Is it too cold to go hunting, Fred? Is it ever too cold to go hunting?
No. Last year, actually, I usually do my best in January when it's like this and it's cold. I actually didn't finish till January 22nd, so it was like a week away. That's about the latest I've got one, but no, I was done by before Thanksgiving. I'll put it that way. Bow and arrow and hit my limit back when it was somewhat warm, November 9th.
All right. So you got over and done with early.
There's stuff. I mean, if you want to coyote hunt now, or there's always something to hunt. You can hunt rabbit, you can hunt geese, stuff like that. But I'm just kind of staying in.
That's probably a good call. We're hunting YouTube and Twitch viewers. If you are watching us on the Twitter, head on over to YouTube. You go to the front page of the OBR. There's a YouTube link right front and center of the OBR right now. And you can head on over to the YouTube chat and ask us questions, interact with us. We'd love to get your questions and comments and react to those. That's really what the show is built around. We want to talk about what you want to talk about. I brought some things here that we, Fred and I, can discuss, but we really want to hear what you want to talk about, and we will center our comments around that. But a lot of stuff going on, Fred. We're going to talk about an article that came out today about Deshaun Watson and his impact on the team. We're going to talk about an article you put out, Fred, about veteran quarterback alternatives. But I guess the big news this week, the Browns named an offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees, sort of indicates that they're going to return to that wide zone play action scheme, quarterback more under center now, with Deshaun Watson apparently not going to play as big a role coming up here in 2025. Do you like the hire?
Is that like the understatement of the year, Barry? Apparently isn't going to have a bigger role.
Apparently he's not going to have a big role.
They've moved on from him, as I've said for a while now. They're going to work around him. He's obviously got to stay on under contract and guaranteed and all that. So he's got to stay as some part of the team or on the roster. But
right.
As far as Tommy Rees, a lot to like about him. I mean, if Nick Saban, hires him as his offensive coordinator, believe it, as a college, but he said a lot of good things about him. Everywhere, everybody said great things about him. I think he's 32 years old. He's got a lot of experience, and he's definitely a rising star, at least by most indications. When you hear that if he was the finalist, a lot of people said that if Bill Belichick wouldn't have jumped in and, jumped back in the fray, that Rees would have got hired as the North Carolina, head coach. So I like that it's in-house to some degree, that they have that, what are you going to say, confidence in him. I mean, when you're 3-14, you hire the tight end coach, to be the offensive coordinator doesn't sound too great. But by all indications, I'm more intrigued with going back to what worked, kind of back to the future. Joe Bitonio, Jack Conklin, they all talked about it, in the final. So you kind of had an indication that probably was brought up, or they wouldn't have been talking about it. And so you kind of knew that it was going this way. So it's a little bit I don't know Tommy Rees, if it's basically he's going to have to learn Stefanski's system. I think with the situation, I'm feeling pretty strong that Stefanski's going to call the plays, and that would take the job off the table, I would think, for guys like Daryl Bevel and even Clint Kubiak. I mean, I always question why Alex Van Pelt would want to be the offensive coordinator when he really didn't get to call plays. And from the outside looking in, you're wondering, what is the attraction of being the offensive coordinator if you're not calling the plays? That's kind of the gig, you would think. So he was happy with that. I think Rees, being 32 and his first chance now to have the title, is somebody that not only, Stefanski said a lot of good things about him during the year, but he called him incredibly brilliant football mind. And so they wanted to keep him, but he was probably agreeable to, if he doesn't call the plays, that's okay. But going back to the system, I just did a little bit of quick check. Why wouldn't, I know they wanted to go on to bigger and better things, from the offense, and by all means, the 2023 wasn't the most explosive offense. You had 5 different quarterbacks and so forth, but they averaged over 23 points a game. They were tied for 10th in the NFL. Let's just say 24 points a game. If you just look at the 17 game this year, if the Browns would have just said, I'll take the 24 every game, they'd have been 10-7.
Right.
Okay. That's kind of a big swing from 3-14.
Yep.
Now, I predicted them to be 10-7, so I thought the offense would be, no, just kidding. I did predict that. Obviously, it's way off. But my point is, you think you could do better even than that. That's why they made the move. So why not at least get back to square one, get a running game going, and that's also part of why Joe Flacco was successful, is because they had a threat of a running game in the play action pass. This year they finished, dead last, I think, or in offense, but they were like 29th in running. They averaged 94 yards. They were no threat of the running game. And Ken Dorsey and them were throwing 40, 50 times a game. And I know a lot of people are not very high on Jameis Winston, but I think if he didn't have to throw the ball 40, 50 times a game, he would have looked a lot better. That's not his wheelhouse, is throwing that many times. If he would have had a strong running game, they wouldn't have asked him to throw the ball all over the field. And he looked pretty good out of the play action. So just saying, I think that's what Stefanski is. It was kind of like putting a square peg in a round hole, trying to make him whatever you want to call it, a RPO that, and to his credit, he tried to adjust and change. It just didn't work.
Right. And he was desperate enough to bring in Ken Dorsey to try to adjust and change to Deshaun Watson, and obviously it was a complete disaster. So Tommy Rees, new offensive coordinator, as they try to get back to their roots in Berea, as they are trying to reestablish themselves, The Athletic comes out with a story sort of looking back on 2023 and 2024 after the fact, and offering up some things that do not paint the organization in a positive light during the Watson days. A couple of bullet points out of the article, Fred, none of which, I won't say none of which, but most of which shouldn't come as too big of a shock. But teammates were complaining about Watson, basically saying that Joe Flacco picked up more about the Browns offense in 30 days than Watson did in 2 years. That's a quote from one of the players. One of the things which was really surprising is at least one of the players, I don't know exactly how the story was sourced, but one of the players said that Stefanski refused to criticize Watson in film review sessions and then criticized his successors once he left the building. Now, Watson went through a very difficult time early on in the season, death of a member of the family, death of a close friend. He had this court case right at the beginning of the season. Seemed like his mental state was, let's say, delicate. It really seemed like the team, based on all this, was just folding itself inside out, not to mess with his head and to treat him with kid gloves, to put it mildly. Fumble 13 asked a question: did you see any of the issues with Watson that were outlined in Jason Lloyd's article today? Any of this sort of kid glove treatment of Watson during training camp and during the brief interludes during the season where you got to see Watson on the practice field?
Well, for the inner workings of it, we don't have a lot of access to the players. I mean, we can see them out in training camp on the field for most practice, but as far as talking to them, it's maybe once a week at most, and that's more of a formal setting, so to say. The one thing I'll say, since Watson got here, I felt like he was always defensive, and he was always like with a chip on his shoulder, like the media, no matter what the question, it was, you're out to get him. And I know specifically a question I asked him in training camp, and it wasn't out to get him. I mean, my question was on the lines of the last game you played against Baltimore. You obviously got hurt. You were playing on a high ankle sprain. You were playing with a broken bone in your shoulder, and yet you were like 14 of 14, and you did what you had to do to win the game. Did that allow you to realize that maybe you don't have to do it all yourself? You got teammates you can just get the ball to. And he took that like, I've never been playing Superman or superhero ball. I'm like, that isn't at all what I was asking you,
Right.
And there was, that particular, my question. The next question, he went into where he started swearing, using a lot of language, being, and it's just, I get that, but most of the stuff was brought on him. I think for the most part, people wanted him, were judging him on football at this point. But nothing in the story that Lloyd wrote surprised me. I thought, and some of it was common knowledge. I do, as far as the criticism, obviously I'm not in a coaching meeting, but it did seem like they went out of their way to protect him. But I can't speak to that behind closed doors. But that's kind of Kevin Stefanski. I mean, 7 weeks we watched, or 6 weeks, him play like garbage. And every week he would say, no, I'm not thinking of benching him. He gives us the best chance to win. He never criticized him. He doesn't criticize anybody. But when the switch to Winston, it was, saw a little bit more, about the embellishing on the turnovers. Well, this guy was turning the ball over too, or being ineffective. And even when he benched Winston, to me, I think it's a bunch of hogwash to say that DTR or Bailey Zappi gave him the best chance to win, because all you had to look at the play in those last 3 games, it was worse than it was. It was back to the Watson offense,
Right.
Well, clearly, Jameis Winston was the best quarterback they had this year. And I get they wanted to see DTR play, but don't tell us, you're trying to win when you clearly could have done something else. And you could have done that back when Watson was playing. So, yeah, I just think that, like anything, when the tide turns, people are a little more willing to talk. I will point out that the team votes on captains, and they elected Deshaun Watson the captain. A lot of times
Right.
quarterbacks are the captain, but it wasn't a given, like, and if you're on the team, you're not going to vote for him if you really don't want him or don't think he's a leader or whatever. So yeah, I just felt like a lot as far as the, I don't know if he addressed the injury or re-injury, stuff like that. It is hard for me to believe that you just send a guy off with that type of investment and you're really not having him being checked on a regular basis unless you've said, well, we've kind of moved on to some degree from you,
Right.
or you didn't want him around, which I think, the latter was a point. But that was how it was last year with his shoulder injury. He wasn't around the facility. He was out in LA or somewhere, with the surgeon rehabbing and so forth.
I guess with this story, as damning as this, not only to the player, but by extension to the coaching staff, even if Watson is on the roster next year, as they have to pay him because of this guaranteed contract, is there any way, after his teammates have said this stuff about him to the press, and that sort of thing, that you can have him into the locker room? That you can have him around? It just seems to me like it would be a very uncomfortable situation in 2025.
I think that I don't know what it's like as last year in Houston. He was inactive every week after he has to be traded. I doubt if he was in their locker room or their facility. They basically just paid him to go away. And I would think, especially if he's on the PUP list or injury reserve, those guys you never see unless they're Nick Chubb. Most of them go off to wherever and rehab on their own or with their own people, and they have to check in. Some of them are required to be, close. But I just figure once they've officially made the decision, which I think they have long ago, move on, they'll work something out mutually, like say, hey, we don't want you to be around. You don't need to be. I don't think, you'd have to ask him twice to just go to Miami or wherever he wants to be, because it's obvious, he wants to be doing other things right now.
Yep. We have a couple of associated comments relative to this and questions. Let's get through these and then change the subject. Fumble 13 said, did any players pull Watson aside and tell him to get his crap straight, or did he just ignore them if they did? And I don't think we have any way of knowing that, unless players told us. Might be a good question for asking insiders in case Lane knows. I've never heard anything like that. Have you, Fred?
No. And I don't like anonymous people saying stuff anyway, because there's no accountability. It'd be easy now for players or whatever to say things, but he's still on the team, still on the roster, who knows what the future will bring in. But like I said, he gets voted captain. The team had high hopes that he was going to lead them to the playoffs and beyond this year, when they did that, or I don't think they would have, done that. It's like it's a performance-based business. And as things, were unraveling and they're saying, this just isn't working, and you're continually kind of giving us this line. I've said this many times. So unfortunately, Watson gets hurt, but say he didn't get hurt. How long would he have been the starting quarterback? Would he have been all 17 games, continually played, and just with the idea, hopefully, in their mind, he works his way out of it? Because that's the only way I can justify Stefanski saying he gives us the best chance to win and we're going to continue to start him, because they knew how much was invested in him. And even if it took him 7, 8, 9 games, but then all of a sudden he looked like the old Deshaun Watson, even with the season being lost, they would have felt like, okay, now we're going somewhere. But, once he got hurt, obviously it's a major injury for somebody to come back, especially it relies on their mobility. That shoulder a year ago. I mean, so there's way more concerns, now. And and the 19 games out of 52, I mean, even if he would have been the quarterback they thought they were getting, you'd almost have to be making a decision based on his health. Can you have a quarterback that never plays more than 7 games? I mean, that's where it is now. He had an ACL his rookie year, missed the whole season once he got hurt. He had the shoulder injury and he had now the Achilles. And that's like 3 basically season-ending major injuries.
Yep. Kelly Black says, I appreciate that articles have to be written and hosts need things to talk about, but I think people are piling on now. And if you say the Browns org has moved off and on, why can't we? Well, good point. I have to say that, quite frankly, I'd be just as happy if we didn't have to talk about this and could just focus on the future. So,
I pretty much moved on with it, and that's the articles, because they got a much bigger question: is what are they going to do? And I view this. I applaud them for being as aggressive as they did to get Watson. That they alienated Baker Mayfield and had to move on from him and were painted into a corner, and part of what Lloyd was writing about is how it all came about. And I kind of tend to agree with that I don't think everybody thinks Jimmy Haslam, is the one that said, we got to go get Deshaun Watson. I think the PR or the public personnel department, Andrew Berry or one of his people brought it. And then as a group, they were all on the same page. Then they got turned down by Watson, and it was down to 3 teams. And then somehow Barry got back, instead of taking no, he got back in there, something to the effect of, if you just name your price, whatever it is, what would it be to get him to come here? And they said $230 million guaranteed or whatever they said. And they went to Haslam and said, okay, this is it. And obviously it would be up to the owner to sign off on it. I think it would be more like that than any other way, because I'm sure there was also time frame. If you've been eliminated, but then you get the door open where they listen to you saying that, I don't think they said, well, get back to us in a couple of weeks. It was like, you got 30 minutes or whatever to make this decision. And they did it, obviously. Right. So I don't know for sure, but yeah, I think the decisions they make in free agency or in trades at quarterback are much more important than what happens to Deshaun Watson going forward. I mean, I think he had his opportunity. Unfortunately, it was a disaster. They're moving on.
We got to move on.
I think everybody else is ready to turn the page as well.
Right. Stephen Glock says, he points a finger at AB for not doing enough due diligence. I've had the quote up there. You can read it. That's his take on the issue. And like you said, let's rock and roll. Let me check to see if we've got some other comments. No. But one good way to forget about the Deshaun Watson era is to get yourself into a good physical workout. And a great way to work out is by turning to the tools provided by our friends at Core Home Fitness, which you can find at corehomefitness.com. They have a great assortment of lifting equipment, including their top-rated adjustable dumbbells, which are the best on the planet, not according to me, but according to the wonderful people at Men's Health and the New York Times and you name it. If they have rated adjustable dumbbells, they put Core Home Fitness right at the very top. And if you go to corehomefitness.com nowadays, maybe you checked them out when I first started talking about them at the beginning of last year, but check them out again. Check out corehomefitness.com again, and you'll see that they have all kinds of training videos now, all kinds of workout programs, all kinds of ways to sort of guide your workout so that you can use their equipment for maximum effectiveness. As I've always told you, they've got a US-based support team, fast shipping, hassle-free returns, you name it. They're focused on customer support. So check out corehomefitness.com for the ultimate in-home fitness equipment. They support the OBR, and thank you very much to our friends at Core Home Fitness. All right. So thank you for that, everybody. And let's get on to some more of your questions. One thing I want to do before we're done is I want to make sure we go over your article, Fred, on veteran QB alternatives. But let's answer some questions first. Question from Fumble 13. Quick pick. Trade down or Abdul Carter at 2, guys? That's the question. So you're on the clock, Fred. Now, normally you'd have 15 minutes to answer the question, but for the sake of brevity, what do you do?
Well, if my choice is trade down or take Abdul Carter, I take Abdul Carter. I want a blue chip player at that position. You know, I know a lot of people like to trade down. You get a lot of picks, and it's like a lottery. There's usually only about 5 players that are really game-changing type players in a draft. And if there's one of them, you take them. Frankly, I don't think the Browns want to pick at the top of the draft again. And even if the quarterbacks aren't worthy in their opinion of taking, then you take the best player. But if they think that, name the name, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders is the franchise quarterback, you take him at number 2 because in fact, if there's only one of those 2 they think is, then you do, and you try to move to number 1 because you're never going to be closer to have that chance. You can't say, well, let's just wait till next year. I've been through this so many times. The next year guys are never the same as what you think they are now. You think, oh, next year's going to be all these great quarterbacks. There's usually only 1 or 2 in a draft that's really a franchise-changing quarterback. And wherever they are, if you have a chance to get them, you get them. And that goes to say, even if, let's say they've decided Sanders or Ward, either one of them they'd be happy with. And so it wouldn't matter whether they had 1 or 2. They had them equal. I would still go move heaven and earth in March to make a trade or free agent, whatever they identify, to get somebody, assuming you couldn't get a quarterback in the draft that can help you this year. Because you won't know, really. You probably had your grades and talked to them and all, but you don't know how the draft will unfold. But you do know how free agency and trade market, and you could secure who you wanted before the draft occurs. And then if you get somebody in the draft, hey, it's great. But you're not under the gun to make, that pick. If you could get somebody, and I don't even know if there is anybody in a trade. They're all older. If they're available, they're going to be mid-30s probably or later. They could play and they could win. The only reason, they would be available is because that team doesn't want to give them a long term and wants to get younger at the position. But for you, that might be enough to be a winning quarterback next year, a winning team. So, in that situation, like you said, I would take Carter. If I trade down, I wouldn't want to go more than a couple spots. I mean, if you're at 2 and you can switch with the Giants, and they give you a ransom to move up a spot, I could see doing that. But you go down to 6, 7, 8, you don't know for sure who you're going to get.
Right. That's been my theory too. I mean, you trade down. If you trade down, you don't trade so far that you can't get, in my mind, Carter or Mason Graham, the 2 guys I really like. So I saw, Fred, today my first mock draft that has the Browns taking Jaylen Milroe at number 2 in the draft, and it comes from our friends at CBS. Big Brother at CBS has us taking Jaylen Milroe in the draft. And Jeffrey Champion asked, do you guys think that Rees would want to get Jaylen Milroe in the draft because he worked with him at Alabama? I was thinking, maybe in the second round or trading up a little bit to get in the bottom of the first round if they really, really like him. Number 2 in the draft took me by surprise, but there are people saying he's going to rise when he gets to the combine. People see how fast he is. I don't know. But do you think that Rees-Jaylen Milroe connection is going to be working for the Browns? Everybody's talking about it, Fred.
I don't study quarterbacks, but the game I saw, he didn't look like he was ready for the NFL. And if you draft somebody number 2, you know that he's going to play. They're going to probably start him, to start the year or very quickly. The more games they play in college, it's kind of been proven they've had a better success rate in the NFL. And I don't see that. I mean, yeah, I don't even feel like you get your franchise quarterback unless you get him at the top of the first round. Otherwise, you're kind of lucky. You can say what they want, but the Ravens are either the smartest people in the world or whatever to get Lamar Jackson, is like the 5th quarterback that year, and I think it was 32nd. So I know he's been compared to Jackson, Milroe, and some things I've said. Yeah, if you get a guy like a Cousins or a Carr or a Geno Smith that could start this year and you can win with, and you want to take a chance on him, yeah, I would think end of the first round or 33, the top of the second round is where you do something like that. But I just don't see guys like that immediately. To me, it's kind of a project. And how are they going to get experience if they're not playing anymore, if they're not playing college, So
right.
I just think that would be a big reach. That's where you trade down. If you're convinced that's the guy, I can't see anybody taking him at number 2,
Yeah.
But if
seems crazy to me, but
if that's what happens out of they always call it, Phil Savage always called it the silly season, because everybody forget what these guys looked like playing on Saturdays between now and the combine, when they're over there in their t-shirts and underwear and they're not being worried about getting hit or anything. They just show their pure athleticism. And so many times that doesn't pan out. Guy like Anthony Schwartz, fastest guy out. Well, he can't catch, but that's okay. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of these guys will go up the board, but I just don't see going out using your pick. I mean, these don't happen that often. It's hard for me to believe that they would be convinced that this guy can step in immediately and play. But
right.
If they find another alternative they feel real good with, they could make a trade like I suggested and get somebody they can win with right now for a year or 2. Okay, take the project. But I think they could really get some good players, by using the picks, get starting caliber players that should be Pro Bowl level players. And that's the biggest thing for Andrew Berry. He's has one Pro Bowler after 37 picks, but he hasn't got to pick the last 3 years because of Watson trade. So has he learned anything? Like, okay, you want to hope now he's honed in and is going to get, a top level playmaker, with a, like the Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, that type of a thing.
Right. Let's see here. From E. Gillen, question, what's Fred's suggestion on how the Browns can ensure a good running game in 2025, irrespective of quarterback? So you talked about step one, with Kevin's offense being, let's reestablish that running game. So how do we do that, Fred? what's step one in reestablishing our running game after finishing so poorly in 2024?
Well, yeah, I think that you got to de-emphasize the passing game instead of like a pass-first offense is what they wanted to run. You know, I think Joe Bitonio summed it up. He was kind of getting excited talking about, the wide zone and running the ball, and Jack Conklin was too. I think Bitonio would be reinvigorated and would sure sound like he was planning on playing again. Conklin played pretty well. I don't know Posick if he's that level, but Wyatt Teller, some of his best was in that as well. He became a Pro Bowler. So you could effectively have 4 of your starters, and you don't have to spend a lot of assets on the offensive line. It doesn't hurt you to get younger and find, but maybe in free agency you can find a center, an upgrade from Posick, like the guy from Green Bay went to Ohio State. I think Josh Myers is a free agent, and you got DeJuan Jones. I don't know, what they're thinking there, but they could get a tackle if they aren't sold on him. But if you have your line in place, and Njoku's proven that he can block and he'll do that, I think you could get the running game back going. Maybe not as high as it was before when they were top 5, but if you could just at least get in the top 12 and be the threat to set up the play action. Now, it's tough with Nick Chubb. You want to think he's going to come back and be like Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, everybody thought was done. He goes to the Ravens, and he looks like he did when he was 22. So I don't know coming off that injury, but I think I would draft not a first-round pick, but it's a pretty deep draft for running backs. I think I would look pretty heavy at one of these guys, and I don't know how high you go. I don't know if you trade up into the second or even third round. Third round, maybe. It would seem like, unless, there's a big run on them, that you could get a really good running back. And I think the days of the Nick Chubb are over as far as John Dorsey, drafted him, 35th overall. I don't think this regime would do that. Their future at running back is a composite of like 3 backs, kind of like the Jerome Ford, Pierre Strong, that type of, with a third, like Foreman. I don't know if you have anybody in that trio right now other than Jerome Ford. I would assume Chubb will be back with Ford, but if you could get a strong third guy that might even be better than Ford, might even be better than Chubb, that would be, a commitment to the run. You got to have a running back that's not just a guy. I mean, there's things once in a while, Jerome Ford, when he gets a little out in the open, he's good, but he's not between the tackles. You feel like he goes down as soon as he gets touched, whereas get that Scattaboo guy from Arizona State that reminds me of Peyton Hillis, just a battering ram, maybe you can get him. I don't know where he's projected, but somebody, that could be a workhorse and you can pound the ball, because I think it would help a rookie quarterback. It would help a veteran quarterback all the way around if you had a consistent running game. And they've been successful. Even last year, without Chubb, they were 12th in the NFL, 118 yards a game. They dropped like 25 yards a game this year in the running game. And they didn't have Chubb this year they had him for, but it wasn't, you know what I'm saying? They were only getting 70, 80 yards a game. So even a year ago without Chubb, they were averaging 118 a game. So I think they got to that's kind of what Rees and Stefanski and all of them got to put together is, okay, and the offensive linemen we have, are they suited? They're suited for this. Are they still playing at a high enough level where we can go with them? Or do we need to replace, one or the other guys up
Right.
there.
Right. A little bit of news. I think Jack McCurry had this in the chat earlier, but Browns special team coordinator Bubba Ventrone has been selected as one of the head coaches for the Senior Bowl. So Bubba is going to get a firsthand look at some of these players that are going to be at the Senior Bowl. Always a good thing for the Browns to be able to coach up some of these players and get a good look at them. So that's a little bit of news. Let's talk a little bit about your article, Fred. You talked about veteran quarterback alternatives that the Browns might be able to look into via trade. You mentioned Geno Smith, who's due a $16 million roster bonus on March 16th as a guy who might be available. Derek Carr, there's a lot of discussion about how much money he's due and when it's due and all that sort of stuff. But he looks really good against the Browns earlier this year. And Kirk Cousins, of course, might be a cap casualty with the rookie down there in New Orleans. And there's a whole bunch of free agents out there. Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones, and Jameis Winston's available. Out of the quarterbacks that you talked about in that article, which ones to you are particularly intriguing?
Well, my angle is when you look at the body of the work that Andrew Berry's done in his 5 years, I don't see how anybody cannot argue the best area he's been is making trades. Identifying, maybe you don't even have to identify him. You just identify if they would fit in with you, but you already know they're a good player. It's just really the team is wanting to unload the guy. I don't think anybody would say, well, Mary Cooper's terrible. The Cowboys had CD Lamb, didn't want to pay Cooper $23 million for the next 3 years. So right. Andrew Berry sees that, offers them a fifth and a sixth to take them off their hands because he would take the contract. And boom, good player. Same thing, Jerry Jeudy. For whatever reason, the Broncos didn't want to extend him. Good player. I think 5th, 6th round. They were willing to extend him. Zadarius Smith. They got him in the last year of a contract. They did Elijah Moore, kind of same thing. That one, he was earlier in his contract, so he had to give up a 2nd round. But again, it was more of the money, and they were willing to take it on. So with that said, I know quarterback's a different position, but as they know way more than I do, the contracts on all these guys, and if there's a contract like a Geno Smith, okay, going to be 35 next fall. They were 10-7, and I was reading in Seattle, and their writers out there are saying it might be better for the Seahawks to take a step back, even if they don't get as good a quarterback play, and get a young guy and go forward, because you're going to have to sign him to like a 3-year extension, $100 million or whatever to keep him around. And so to me, he's a good quarterback. He's, after going to Seattle, he was one of those washed up guys they thought was a bust. But if you can say, we'll trade for him, you got him then, okay?
Right.
They can't pick another team. And they can do their restructure deal and so forth. So to me, that's the best path. I know John Dorsey did that to get Tyrod Taylor the year they ended up drafting Baker Mayfield, but he traded for him ahead of free agency. And trade you can do, before free agency kicks in, you agree to it and all that. So Smith, to me, you look at his numbers, are pretty good. Derek Carr. If all of these guys right now, I would want Derek Carr. I think he's 33.
Yeah.
He killed the Browns all the time when he was with the Raiders. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's productive. In fact, I wanted him when they went after Watson, and he ended up by default ended up being the backup plan for the Saints, and obviously he's done better there. You look at him; he had an injury-plagued season this year, but he's been pretty durable, and so a guy like that, I don't know all the mechanics. Like Cousins is under contract, so you could trade for him, but there's with the dead cap and all that, the obvious thing is he's going to be released. Well, that's very well could happen with Cousins, or not Cousins, Derek Carr, and so he
Mm-hmm.
could be a free agent. But he has a no trade clause. If it is feasible to trade or acquire him in a trade and just take on the contract, the way they restructure and so forth, that would be probably my first choice. The Geno Smith seems to be the cleanest because I think he's got the 16 million bonus
Mm-hmm.
about the new league year, and I think his salary is 31 million for next year. So if they could get him, they'd immediately do that restructure with him, and whether it's for longer or to spread out the cap, and that would be a good alternative. I'm looking for somebody who just comes in, kind of like what they thought with Watson, but without baggage, that is good and you could win games with.
Right.
And
Right.
I don't know about any of these free agents. This time last year, I don't think anybody on our forum would have said Sam Darnold is going to throw for 35 touchdowns and lead a team to the playoffs 14-3 next year. Well, if you did, you should have went to Vegas with that.
Exactly.
And what I'm saying is I listed there, a lot of it is good fortune. I don't really believe in luck, but that's kind of what it is. They got to be in the right place at the right time. A lot of the guys that resurface, like Geno Smith, were high
Mm-hmm.
picks that for whatever reason weren't in the right system. Sam Darnold, do you think there's a guy like Zach Wilson? Is he ready to have that type of resurgence? Former number 2 pick in the draft. Mitch Trubisky, former number 2 pick in the draft. I had a bunch of them listed. I even threw in Jameis Winston. I'm not as down on him as everybody else is, just because in that zone scheme, and you don't have him throw the ball so much, I think he could be like Flacco was in that scheme,
Right.
not throw
Right.
the ball away every he's going to throw interceptions, but that one year before he got hurt, he had 14 touchdowns, 3 interceptions when they had a good running game down in New Orleans. So,
Mm-hmm.
but the guys I have listed there, can't remember them all, but as far as I think an option in free agent is Darnold or
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Jones, whoever the Vikings don't retain, or if they let them both go, I don't know. But the trade thing to me, and there might be other ones out there, but when you look at the list, I mean, even Carr, he didn't play enough to hit the final rankings, but if he would have been 10th in the NFL in passer rating, this year, even
Right.
on a kind of a down year.
All right. Well, there are some options there. It's a little bit of dumpster diving, but fair enough. Um, we'll see. We'll see what the Browns can chase. Derek Carr is an intriguing option. That's for sure. While we develop someone else, say a Jaylen Milroe or something like that. Okay, let's dive back into the questions. A number of questions like this one from Jack. Any insight into whether the Browns will hire a quarterback coach or whether Rees will handle that too? There was some question about whether Bevel might fit that role, but that would be a lateral move from Miami, I believe. So Miami could certainly turn that down. Have we heard anything from the team about any sort of ETA about when they plan on filling some of these other positions? For example, the tight end coach, now a vacancy. with Rees becoming the
I would
offensive
think
coordinator.
they'd hire a tight end coach. I can see Rees being the quarterback coach, as offensive coordinator. He was the passing coordinator last year, was part of his title, and tight ends coach, especially if he's not going to call plays. Alex Van Pelt was the quarterback coach and the offensive coordinator. It just seems like that would make the most sense. He was a quarterback. He's worked with quarterbacks. Ian Book, at Notre Dame, had a lot of success at college under him. So, as you talked, he worked the year with Jaylen Milroe. I think that he would be the quarterback coach, as well as the offensive coordinator. Now, it wasn't in the title, so
right.
They might just be waiting to see, but I don't know. I don't know if, like you said, other guys that have interviewed, really why they'd be excited to come and be the quarterback coach when you don't even know who your quarterback is. So
yeah, exactly.
I think it's one of those that just kind of wait and let the dust settle, and then, well, we really need to add somebody here and there. I don't think that, that's a big thing.
Yeah, I would also think that Rees being the offensive coordinator sort of bodes well for internal candidates, people who are already in the building to perhaps get a promotion. From Fumble 13, ask any chance one of our assistant GMs will get a full-time gig. So far, it doesn't sound promising. The Titans haven't hired a GM yet. Hickman interviewed down there, right? The Browns assistant GM. I haven't heard of Glenn Cook getting an interview. He hasn't gotten an interview yet, has he?
Catherine Hickman, did. I understand it was like a Zoom or a virtual. But they've announced, I don't know why these teams, it's kind of funny how they all announce that they interviewed this person or that person. I think they brought back the Colts GM or assistant GM for a second interview, and they now named Dodds. So that would tell me that, okay, he's farther down the road, unless they start saying we also brought back another one for second or third. Sometimes I think these are just courtesies. I don't know how many interviews Hickman has had, if this is the first one. I know Cook has went through that before. I don't know. Sometimes it's just courtesy to get experience and so forth. I don't know how serious they are, but I wouldn't think a 3-14 team would be, we got to get their GM, their assistant GM,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They might be exactly the same, but when they're 14-3, they're a lot more a hot commodity. I don't know what year it was when Quessy went to Minnesota. It was probably after one of the good years, that he was a hot commodity. So that's just kind of seems how it goes.
Right. Okay, a couple more questions here from Jeffrey Champion. He asked, what about Jimmy Garoppolo? He played a good game against Seattle last game of the season with backups. He's made it to a Super Bowl in his career, and he's going to be cheap. Everybody likes quarterbacks with good experience who are inexpensive, right, Fred? So you think he is a candidate?
Yeah, I had him as there's, you look at the list, there's 20 some names, but there's something wrong with them. Quarterbacks are so, especially starting quarterbacks are so hard to find, as we all know, that if somebody, they feel they have one. I think with he had injuries every time he's had a chance to be the starter. Something's went wrong injury wise. So, I don't know. I mean, a guy like Carson Wentz, you think that was a guy that was like on an MVP pace with the Eagles, and then he got hurt the year they won the Super Bowl, and he kind of like was never heard of again, and it's like, so I think a lot of it's catching lightning in a bottle, and you have to believe and put them in the right situation. I mean, I think of Stefanski up there, Minnesota, had Case Keenum, and they lost their quarterback in like the second or third game. And you thought their season's over. You put in Case Keenum. He throws 26 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and they go all the way to the NFC Championship game. So you think, okay, why can't Stefanski take some of these guys? And he's shown, like with Jacoby Brissett had maybe his best year with the Browns.
Mm-hmm.
Keenum, he didn't play him when he was here when Mayfield was hurt. So it's just hard to scratch your head and say, is there one of these guys that Stefanski said, that guy would fit great in my system and he can still play? Not a Case Keenum now at 38 or whatever he is. But I don't know. I put 2, Russell Wilson. I think he'll probably go back to the Steelers. And Aaron Rodgers, I can't really put a reason other than he's 40. And can you imagine having Aaron Rodgers and Deshaun Watson in your quarterback room?
No.
So, yeah.
I don't see that happening.
I don't think they want any part of that. So I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, we probably won't know till mid-March when the wheels start to churn. They said, when they announced finally the Watson deal back when it happened in 22, they said they were on that back in October of 21, that they spent October to March laying the groundwork, investigating because they thought he might be available. And so you have to think, well, obviously you spend that much time and you see what happened, that they would have been exploring a lot of options. And this time, you really don't have a quarterback in place that you're offending. Because y'all knew when Baker was here, as soon as the word got out, you were trying to replace him, that he was going to go off the deep end, and he did.
Right. Yep.
And so, I don't know what they don't tell us anything, and nor should they. But I don't know. They have, for my, the Geno Smiths and Derek Carrs and Kirk Cousins, they got to know 100 times more about it than I do, and what's the better way to go about it, or if somebody has even got a chance, the Cousins contract, they could work with it. Could New Orleans restructure and like a sign and trade thing, or the Cousins or whatever? Because I think more so than anything, especially in their case, unless somebody really loves Kevin Stefanski, I think your better bet's to trade for him as opposed to get him to try to pick you, because it might not be that enticing. Because even Cousins would say, well, why would I come there? I like you, Kevin, but you're going to draft a guy number 2, and I'm going to have the same thing as Michael Penix. He's going to replace me first time I mess up, So you got all these factors in the game. And then who knows with the draft? Is Dion talking to him saying, don't take Shedeur? I don't want you to take, we're going to throw a fit. Or is that okay? Is that a moot point? Or do they not really like him that much? Or do they like Cam Ward? And, so it's just, you don't know. But when it comes out, it's going to be, this is what we wanted to do all along. And you're not going to know all this background information that we're throwing out there.
Question from World's Fastest Fat Man. Do the Browns get supplemental picks for Babes going to the Pats? I don't think so. He's just a consultant. And he didn't have an official role with the team, right, Fred?
Yeah, as coaching consultant, I don't know if that falls under, compensation. It's usually players, like, and what they do with their new team. Like, I've heard that you might even get a 6th-round pick because of Joe Flacco playing at Indianapolis and his performance and stuff like that. So it's players. I don't think you get it for a coaching consultant.
Right. Dean Bowditch asks, is Nick Chubb honestly in the mix for next year, or do they cut the cord? Kyle Trask in Tampa is a free agent. Any thoughts on him? As far as Chubb is concerned, Isn't the adage that players with injuries like his typically don't do well the first year, that they would do better the second year? Is everybody forgetting that, or is the consensus that Chubb just won't be Chubb ever again?
Yeah, I think they were hoping just to get back on the field and kind of get a dry run because it's the next year. And I think what hurts is you wanted him to just go into the off season. In fact, I was thinking once you were out of it, shut him down. He's got 6 games in where he's got the feel of playing again. Now let him finish healthy and not take a chance on an injury so he can not be rehabbing all winter and hit the ground running, so to say, in the offseason. Well, then he got hurt. But
All right.
Yeah, I totally expect, with the major injury, the second year is when you are really at your best as opposed to the first year. I think he was just finding his way, and he said even the week he got hurt, before he got hurt, is that he still feels that he's getting better and better and better. Now, this injury, I don't think it was major injury. I saw him walking around the locker room at the end of the season. I don't know if it was a hairline fracture or what it was, stress fracture or whatever it might have been, but I don't think it required surgery and stuff. So I think he'll be fine on that. I think it's just, you just don't know, is he going to be the 5.3 yard a carry Nick Chubb?
Right.
And I don't know if anybody knows that. So it's going to be low risk. I don't see him cutting the cord. He's a free agent. I see him similar to this year. Look, we'd like to have you back, incentive laden contract. Last year, he was supposed to make like $14 million, but it wasn't guaranteed. They could have cut him. They redid it, gave him a couple million guaranteed with incentives. I don't think he hit a lot of incentives because he didn't play enough, but I think it'd be the same type thing. And you don't count on him. You got him and Jerome Ford, but you acquire one, whether it's in free agency or in the draft, that you feel could be a 1A, running back, could be your starter, better than Jerome Ford.
Right.
You got Jerome Ford in the 5th round. I mean, I know you find guys once in a while, but pretty much you get what you pay for, and that's why I haven't been nothing against DTR. He's a 5th round quarterback. I mean, everybody's looking for a quarterback. So, that's why I think if you got all these picks, identify somebody that you think could be 1,000-yard rusher. And that's not all in this day and age, but so not counting on Nick Chubb to be the Pro Bowl back, but if he is, great. You got him, and you got another one, and Jerome Ford, maybe your 2A or 2B or your 3rd one.
Right.
So, sure. I think you have to, you got to have a good running back to, so when they can hit the hole, and you can get that, they get that running game going again.
All right. Well, I'd like to close the show with an administrative note. We will be back here, of course, next week at 7 o'clock. It could be that someone associated with the show may have promised on the water cooler to give out lollipops to anyone under the age of 60 who attended the show, and we were called out on that. The lollipops are on back order. You will have to come to next week's show to see if we can give them out. So make sure you attend next week, Wednesday, 7 o'clock. It'll be Fred and I here again talking Cleveland Browns as the adventure continues on OBR Weekly. Thank you very much for hanging out with us. Remember to like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and just if you're on Twitch, do whatever you do on Twitch. Like and subscribe over there too. Thanks a lot for hanging out with us once again. Really appreciate it. Good night, everybody. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Thanks, guys. See you next week.